Welcome to the School Garden Podcast with Mary Jo and Anne. No matter where you are in your school garden journey, whether you are an experienced garden teacher, a novice parent helper, or a struggling home educator, we are here to help you and your kiddos in your garden space. Come and dig in with us because school gardens matter.
It's the All About Potato podcast for the School Garden Podcast. We're so glad you're here. Mary Jo and I cannot wait to share with you all the things you'll need to know to grow potatoes at your school.
I know. It's great. January comes around and it's like, yay, it's potato time. It's fantastic. And actually, as we sit here speaking, I've got 200 pounds of potatoes in my garage ready to go out to various schools and school garden campuses. And we're doing a professional development in a couple of weeks' time. So they'll go far and wide out to different schools, which is exciting. And honestly, Anne, I think I put on about 10 pounds during potato planting time because the kids start to talk about recipes and how they eat it and cheese and butter and let's just eat some potatoes. So it's a fantastic time of year.
So we want to talk a little bit about why we grow potatoes. We are in Zone 8 in North Texas, and this is the perfect place and the perfect time for potatoes to fit into our school calendar. So they're planted traditionally on Valentine's Day. Now, I tend to try to plant them a couple weeks earlier just to get as much time as I can for them to be in the ground. Now, they're harvested really close to the end of the school year, as close to the end as possible. Now, those potatoes will be smaller than if we left them to grow until the plant naturally dies. But potatoes are edible as little new potatoes. And I want my students to experience the entire life cycle of the plant before the summer break.
And it's the universal crop. And, everybody recognises the potato. So the kids all recognise it. So it's not a very scary vegetable to start with, really. If this is the start of your school gardening experience, everybody eats them, and my goodness, once you have eaten a homegrown one, you'll never forget that. So that's one reason you should grow potatoes, is because they are just so delicious. The other really good thing about growing them at this time of year for schools is that the weather really plays nice, actually, with potatoes. So putting them in at the end of January into the beginning of February, we get a little bit more rain. It's not nearly as hot as it would be during the summer months here, so it fits perfectly into the school timetable.
Right. So we wanted to talk a little bit about how the humble potato fits into the school curriculum. So it's not an add-on for teachers. We know you're so busy. We don't want to add something else for you to do. But Mary Jo, talk about some ways that it supports what teachers are already doing in their classroom.
Yeah, this can absolutely be incorporated into many different subjects in the curriculum. The most common one that springs to mind is through social studies. So potatoes are eaten in nearly every corner of the globe, and it plays a valuable role in culture, in heritage, and in celebrations. So our teachers tend to incorporate it into history, into geography. Oh my goodness, if you look at the journey of the potato to the US, or to other parts of the world, it's so interesting and fascinating. I think everybody just assumes that they came from Ireland. It's not. They're actually originated in Peru, in South America. So that's fascinating right there. And students love to talk about how potatoes are prepared and eaten in their own homes and during community celebration, which really leads nicely into talk about studies of worldwide festivals, and we see that incorporated by teachers a great deal in celebration and in culture. A great way to link in math is through estimation. It's absolutely fantastic. So estimating yield and weight, and how many potatoes will this mother tuber yield, and then once you've harvested them, the biggest potato down to the smallest potato, like you said, science and life cycles, absolutely fantastic. You get to see it right from seed potato right the way through to harvesting, seeing the full stages of the growing plant cycle. Health and nutrition is the very valuable part of health and well-being. We'll talk about this a lot on the podcast. The easiest thing you can do in a school garden or in outdoor education is to take a book outside. Either it be a read aloud with a teacher or kids taking books out for silent reading. The most wonderful read aloud book, and I know that you've used it, I use it really quite regularly, is The Enormous Potato by Aubrey Davis. And it is wonderful, particularly for those younger years learners and that, but it's just fabulous. Kind of like counting book. It's an add-on memory book, and at the end of it there's just this massive potato. It's just wonderful.
So now let's talk about the how of planting potatoes. So Mary Jo, tell us more about how to plant potatoes.
Well, potatoes are a hungry crop. And what we mean by a hungry crop is that they need a very rich, nutrient heavy compost or soil to grow in, and that's what we're going to need. We're asking that one seed potato to hopefully yield 12, maybe 15 potatoes, so that needs to happen in a really good soil. So adding a good deal of good compost to where you're growing is the way to go it. Personally, I like to add something like a kelp or a seaweed amendment. It's a very Irish way. I think as long as you are growing in a really rich, nutrient dense, very rich compost, then you are absolutely good to go. So don't get too caught up on the amendments. Just make sure that your soil is really good, well draining. We don't want anything waterlogged. Okay, and you know what? Potatoes are quite complicated. You look at it and you go, how complicated can you be? But gosh, there's over 4,000 varieties of potatoes out there, Anne. So which is the right one for us to grow here or for you to grow where you are in your parts of the world? Usually what is available in your good garden centres, in your nurseries or your feed store is a good rule of thumb about what grows well in your area. And for us, we really want to see that success in gardens, in school gardens, because we want the kids to have a success with their growing. We've all been swayed. Anne, I'm looking at you. I'm pointing the finger at me.
I have been swayed by the wonderful potato catalogs that get here in December and think, I really should buy my potatoes from Maine.
Yes. Yes.
But I found that they grew just as well, if not better, from our local feed store.
Yeah.
Because they are the varieties that grow well in this environment.
That's right. So we again, not judging you. You might go and buy those fabulous kind of ones that grow wonderfully in Hawaii and places like that. But hey, gardening is one big experiment, so you do you. But so here in North Texas, Yukon Gold does very well here. White varieties such as a Kennebec does really well. Red varieties we've got in the garage, remember those 200 pounds? We've got Red Lasoda and some Pontiac. And in Fort Worth, we can grow a really cool purple potato. And the variety is a Purple Majesty, and the kids love that. Especially because it's quite knobbly, isn't it? It's kind of like a lovely, odd little shape in its own right. It's wonderful, and the kids absolutely love that. Now, more than likely, people listening to this, or if you are new to gardening, or any gardener can often fall down a rabbit hole on the internet as they start to research the right way to do this. So it would be quite remiss of us not to say that you can actually grow potatoes from seed. So when we're talking about seed potato that just looks like it came out of the bag in the store, but actually you can grow potatoes from teeny tiny seed, and those seeds occur in the fruit part of the plant, which is quite often called the potato berry or the potato apple, and quite often here in Texas I've heard it called a potato tomato. As it sounds kind of appetizing, and children might be tempted to then pop it in their mouths, but they are very toxic, as are the leaves of a potato plant. So just be mindful of that when you do have kids out in the garden. It's called True Potato Seed, TPS, and that's what it is. So you get little packets like you would any other packets of seed, and it will be potatoes. It's tricky because you've got to start really well advanced of the growing season, generally raised from seed indoors, and then you've got enough outside for growing outside as well, and it's quite hit and miss. Great experiment if you've got some older students maybe, or you've got a bit of time in your timetable. We're going to talk about seed potatoes because that is generally the easiest way, the way that you're going to get much more success. Often teachers will say, oh, there's some sprouting potatoes at the back of the pantry. I can use those. So let's talk about whether you can use those or you do need to go to the trouble of buying a seed potato. So technically, you can grow any potato, but really those ones that we buy from the store or we get from the supermarket have quite often been treated or coated with an anti-sprouting agent. And the reason that they put that on there is for longevity on the shelves. So really they could possibly sprout, but they're not going to fulfill their full potential. Quite often as well, those store-bought potatoes might in their skin harbour some kind of pathogens, some kind of disease, and you do not want to be adding that to your soil in your garden. So really finding and sourcing those seed potatoes either from a nursery or a good garden centre or sending off for them online, because they tend to have been developed and grown disease-free.
Now, one topic that confused me when I started growing potatoes was the idea of chitting. And that is Chitting. Mary Jo, can you talk more about that special extra step?
Yeah. Now, chitting is a problematic word in school, then by all means feel free to call it sprouting. Okay? So yes, so sprouting is the practice of letting our seed potatoes sprout before we plant them in the ground. And the purpose of chitting or sprouting the potato is to get a head start on the growing process. We're asking it to break its dormancy. So by doing it in a room temperature of 55 degrees Fahrenheit or above, we're breaking that dormancy and starting that growing process. And again, the idea is that it produces bigger potatoes and it gives us higher yields when we put them in the ground. And our seed potatoes will grow eyes, Anne. How much do I love our kids talking about all of this? So it's a great idea to let your students touch the seed potatoes, study them up close, have a good look at them, and found those little small reddish white bumps or little dimples, I like to call them. And those are the points on the potato that will potentially sprout. So the best way to chit and to see that process happening is to put the potatoes in, say, an old egg carton on a shelf somewhere that's not in direct sunshine, and then you can watch them over the next few weeks. How long to do it? As long as you can. Okay, about 4 weeks would be great. But if you don't have 4 weeks, don't worry about it. But it's a great exercise to have those kids observing that as well. And they get really invested then in the whole growing experience, don't they? It's wonderful. Now, research and science data is quite divided as to whether chitting actually works or not. But for me personally, I think that it does. And it does on a couple of different levels for us in schools. One, because for the majority of us in schools here in this part of the world, is that we are harvesting early. We are not allowing our potatoes to do their full growing circle, their full growing cycle. We finished school this year on May the 20th, 24th, something like that. So we're going to harvest as close to that date as possible, but that is still early. The plant has still got maybe a good 4-6 weeks left in it to grow. So by chitting them early, it does buy us, they say, about 2 or 3 weeks head start on the growing season. And when you are harvesting early, that's fantastic. The other thing about it, chitting as well, it's just a great process to watch. It's got real educational value to actually watch that process and see the kids start that, Just using the word dormancy, what a fantastic scientific word, for the children then to have in their vocabulary as well. So it's great for our students to see. Now you've got your seed potato, and we've got a couple on the table here.
I know, because for inspiration.
Anne said inspiration. Inspiration. Oh, nice as well. And actually, we can cut up that seed potato to make more seed potatoes, which is fantastic, more bang for your buck. So if you are in a bit of a budget, that's a really great thing as well. You're spreading it out between many classes in your school, then that works really well. Just make sure that you have at least a couple of eyes, a couple of sprouts in each of the pieces. Now, my Irish granddad, Anne, he could get about 8 sweet potato pieces out of one spoon. It was masterful. The master of garden thrift. So just make sure you've got a really sharp knife, cut that, and then you are going to let that piece of potato callus over, which just means that you want it to dry out a little bit before you put it into the soil, because we want to avoid rotting. That's one of the main problems with potatoes. So just make sure that you let it set 24, 48 hours, then they're ready to plant.
Marvelous. So I find the way potatoes grow so fascinating. Yeah. All the potatoes we harvest actually grow above the original potato that we planted. And Mary Jo and I call that potato the mother potato, as do most of our students. And it's a really great way to connect to that potato. The mother potato puts down roots that grow down, and then the potato begins to sprout stems that grow up through the soil from those chits or sprouts. Now, it's on those stems that new potatoes grow. In fact, potatoes are tubers or modified stems. They're not roots. In a little bit, Mary Jo will talk about hilling and why that's important, but it really helps to get the stems underneath as much soil as possible. Yep. So let's move on to where to plant potatoes.
Yeah.
Now, I tend to plant my potatoes in raised beds in a sunny spot that gets sun all day long. Yeah. I amend the soil as Mary Jo suggested. Then the kids and I dig a trench about 4 inches deep. And in our 4x8 beds, I can fit 2 trenches, and they're about 2 or 3 feet apart. Now then each child or group of students will take their potato or their piece of potato and place it in the trench with the eyes or chits pointing up. We want to have a distance of about 8 to 12 inches between each potato. And this plan works just as well as in-ground beds as long as you amend the soil and have extra soil available for hilling, which we'll talk about shortly.
And the joy about growing potatoes, Anne, is that it's just absolutely fantastic for schools that don't have a typical school garden. You can just have like a concrete patch, you can have a grassy little space, and it also gives you that opportunity to grow the potatoes close to your actual classroom, you know? And so many creative ways and inexpensive ways about how you can grow them in different types of containers. Old milk crates, fabric bags, they're really popular on the internet actually, and even laundry baskets, which I know that you've used, they work really well. Old 5-gallon buckets, big old plant pots if you've had a tree delivered to your house or something, those 10-gallon, 15-gallon pots, even trash cans and sacks, especially if you've put some drainage holes at the bottom of them, are perfect potato planters. So in containers like this, what you're going to do is fill up the first third of the container with soil, plant your potatoes as if you were growing them in ground or a raised bed, and then you're going to use the rest of the space there to hill up, and we'll talk about that in a minute as the plant starts to grow.
So this seems like a perfect time to talk about this idea of hilling up.
Yes, very important to talk about this. So hilling up, or banking up as it's called, or earthing up, is the practice of pulling soil around the stem as it grows. So you're going to pull the soil around, which sounds so strange and so counterintuitive to all the rest of the gardening that we do, and covering those leaves and stems, just leaving the smallest bit at the top. And the reason that we do this is it's to encourage further growth, stronger growth, which will give us bigger potatoes and a larger yield as the potatoes start to grow grow above that mother tuber. Now, you might have seen on the internet, or somebody might have told you, about different types of potatoes fall into 2 categories, being determinate or indeterminate varieties of potatoes. I just want to talk about them, give the definition of them, and then we can forget entirely about them. Now, determinate potatoes is a potato that grows shorter and it grows across one layer, okay? Indeterminate grow a taller plant and the potatoes grow on various layers above the mother tuber. And there are a couple of schools of thought about you bank up one, you don't hill up the other. Now, I would say to you, forget everything I've just said about there, just know it, okay? But always bank up. And there's a couple of extra bonus things about banking up that makes it worth banking up every time. So banking up does make the plant work harder, so you're going to get more potatoes, bigger potatoes, but also it really helps with weed suppressing, and that's what we're really into on the gardens. We want to do that. The other thing that it really helps with as well, and this is very important, is it will stop any potatoes that are close to the top of the soil becoming green from sunlight, okay? And you and I know we've been to so many schools where potatoes are very green and you can't use those potatoes, so that's a real disappointment to the kids. So banking up, once your potato plant gets to about 6 inches, you're going to again pull that soil around the stem, covering up that potato plant. You're going to do it maybe 2 or 3 times in the growing season, so every 2 or 3 inches after that, bank up again and hill up.
So now that we've had this whole season to grow our plants, it's time to talk about harvesting. We want the potatoes to stay in the ground as long as possible, harvesting right before school gets out. Now, I know it's a crazy time of year, but of course it's well worth the experience, and it can be folded into the traditions at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So I tend to use 3 different steps when harvesting potatoes. In the first step, students take hold of the stem right above the ground and give a strong pull, just straight up. This may unearth potatoes near the top of the soil, and they love seeing the potatoes for the first time. Now, something to note is potato skins are incredibly delicate and can tear really easily. So during the next step, we gather as a group and we talk about how delicate those skins are. Our fingernails can pull the skins off a potato. And so carefully we begin to search in the soil for potatoes with our hands only. and that protects the skin. After we've pulled those potatoes out, finally I have students step back because I'm not great with pitchforks. And I take a pitchfork and carefully turn over the soil, and then I allow the students to come back to the bed and find any final potatoes. Now I admit it's so hard because I just spear so many potatoes when I do this, and it's heartbreaking. The children lament. It's a really sad time, but
it is.
I get to take those potatoes home that evening and eat them because they can be eaten. So I will admit I've been guilty, and you have too, Mary Jo, of going to the store and buying a bag of potatoes because you never see if you're going to get any potatoes when they come out of the ground.
I know.
And so we've done that, and we hold them in the background, but every single year we get enough potatoes for every child to have one. Now, if we have multiple classes, I will admit when one class leaves, I may put some more potatoes back in the ground so that every child has the experience. Correct. But they are such prolific growers.
Yeah, that's so true. And please don't feel guilty for doing this. This is absolutely no shade, nightshade family on you. Did you like that? Okay. At all. We don't judge you at all because, we have done that. Absolutely done that. And I think it is, if you have such a small space, you've only got one container, but you've got 5 classes that are heavily invested to it. Give each kid the opportunity, hold those potatoes back, put them back in again. I think that's absolutely fine. I really do. And we do it, And also there's not many crops in the garden that you can do that with. So It's kind of nice to do that. So we don't judge you at all. So you have our permission.
Now, it's really important that the potatoes need to be brought out of the sun as quickly as possible and be kept in a dark spot. More on why shortly. And if time permits, I also lay the potatoes in a single layer and place them in a dark, dry spot. And that allows the potato skins to cure or to dry and harden, which is better for serving later.
Yeah.
So you may live in a different zone than we do, have a different school calendar, or you may be growing potatoes at home. So let's talk about how to harvest potatoes naturally at the end of their life. The potato plant will give you lots of clues that it's almost time to harvest. The leaves turn yellow. The stems are not as lush and full as they were, as the plant is no longer sending nutrients and water in the same way up to those parts of the plant. They'll turn brown. They'll fall over. The plant looks like it's died. At that point, stop watering for a couple weeks, and that allows the skins to cure or harden under the soil. And then you're ready to harvest, just as we discussed. Another quick note, you don't want to plant eggplants, tomatoes, or any other nightshade families in the spot where you just harvested your potatoes. Additionally, next year, you don't want to plant potatoes in the same spot. And the reason's simple. There's some pathogens in the soil that may affect the growth of those plants, and one way to protect yourself from that is to rotate your crops or plant your potatoes and nightshades in different spots every year.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about this mother tuber or the mother potato, and the kids really do get quite attached, don't they? They've named her.
Right.
Yeah, I dropped them off last week at a school, and it was Bob. And what's really nice when you are harvesting is actually to find her, And I always love it because the teachers just kind of like watch around as this mushy, spent, finished tuber, quite often smelly and kind of gross, is pulled out of the ground, and you go, what a metaphor for motherhood right there, and it's always caused everybody a chuckle, but so really mother potato has worked very, very hard to do this. It's kind of such an interesting part of the harvesting process, I find as well, so do keep an eye out for her when you are harvesting.
We want to share some top tips for growing success. Let's start with you, Mary Jo.
Potatoes are a hungry crop, so a lot of people will ask what kind of amendment can we give the potatoes during the growing season. So you might want to add like a seaweed or a comfrey or a kelp feed, and it has those kind of nutrients and those kind of mineral elements that potatoes like to grow.
My top tip is there are always more potatoes. So don't give up looking for potatoes too quickly. No matter how often I turn over the soil in our search for potatoes, I always leave a few behind. So it's okay to let the kids dig in that bed for quite some time looking for potatoes. And there's no problem with leaving a few in the ground, because when school starts again in September, you'll get potatoes growing again as a crop.
Yeah.
And that's a great lesson as well.
It's wonderful. So another tip that I would share is, if you are using those milk crates or those laundry baskets or any container that has larger holes around the side, is that you don't want them drying out. So it would be good to line those containers with some cardboard. That really helps with the moisture content and actually keeping the soil inside as well. Another top tip is about watering. Potatoes do not like sitting in waterlogged soil. That is the main culprit for them rotting or your potato crop to fail. Do keep an eye on that. They don't like dry conditions either. So just an even moisture. So if you kind of in the soil, squeezing that makes it's like a damp sponge. That's ideal.
Now what do we do with the potatoes? They're out of the ground. They've cured for a couple of days. Now what happens?
And the kids have just realized that they now have a whole ton of potatoes.
So my favorite thing to do with potatoes is called a potato party.
Yay!
At my school, I only grow potatoes with 1st and 4th grade, so I'm not doing the entire campus. It's overwhelming otherwise. And so once the potatoes are harvested, I take them home and wash every one of them. And then our cafeteria cooks them for me, and we bake them. Yeah. And we have a party. Now, if that's not an option for you, then having the teachers bring a crock pot to school and just pop the potatoes in a crock pot for a few hours, you get a beautiful baked potato. Yeah. So I come in with a cart, and on that cart we have toppings. Thankfully, at our school, we have a nutritionist whose children go to our school, and she's helped me pick out healthy options and also fold in nutrition lessons as we're teaching. So we use Greek yogurt instead of sour cream. We use salsa as a great way to make stuff taste amazing. I didn't try it till last year, but I love it. It's so good. Great.
And so Texan.
Much so.
I love that.
I do too. And then we also use butter and cheese, but we talk about those as sometimes foods. Foods that are just an extra treat. And then thankfully, if we have onions from the garden, we add that in as well. So the kids add their toppings, and then they have an end of the year party, and it's been a hit every time we've done it, and other children are starting to look forward to it. So it's a great tradition to start.
Oh my gosh, and I bet you in about 10 years' time, you'll be walking down somewhere and look, Missy Santana, I remember when we had the potato.
I hope.
Well, because if that had happened at my childhood, I would have loved that and remembered that forever. It's fantastic. Yes. And I was involved with the school one time. The PTA cooked potatoes and had that for graduation, which I thought was lovely,
I love that idea.
But you can always send the potatoes home with the kids.
With a note that lets the families know to look in the backpack, because we have had experiences where families will find something growing literally in the backpack after sitting for 3 months.
A moldy surprise, as we like to call it. That's right.
So we wanted to end this section talking a little bit about how to do this with a class of kids. What I tend to do on planting days is have 3 different stations. One station, they're planting with me. Another station, a third of the students are in a dig bed looking for animals or the soil texture. There's always an empty bed at our school for our kids to continue to dig in.
So great.
And the third station is more sedentary, where they're reading a book or they're writing in their journal. And we rotate through all 3 stations so every child has the experience of planting.
I think that's so lovely, Anne, because these kids really are invested. Sometimes I will pair kids up and one will dig the hole and then they'll both put it in together, including the whole class. Having that opportunity is great.
Before we end, we do need to bring up 2 cautionary notes.
So maybe somebody will suggest to you about coating your seed potatoes, or especially the ones that you've cut, maybe tossing them in sulfur, for example, or ash or cinnamon or honey. So I just do think you need to be very, very mindful about adding anything to your school garden. And Anne and I, we are true organic gardeners, but we are organic school gardeners, which means everything that we bring into the school, we are mindful about how it can be misused by students. Do you like that? Okay, exactly. And so, things like sulfur, they're a massive irritant for eyes. So if you do have any queries about anything that you are bringing into the school, about what you can use, what you can't use, then that is a question for your district or for your principal. Okay.
Great. And my little note is about green potatoes. We've all seen them, but we want to keep harvested potatoes out of the sun and dispose of any green potatoes that we see. Yeah. Because sunlight causes a potato to produce chlorophyll. Because it's a modified stem, it has chlorophyll inside, and when sunlight hits it, it will start to produce chlorophyll.
Yeah.
And that will start to turn the potato green. Sunlight also activates the potato skin to make solanine. And that is, again, a mild toxin which should not be eaten. So for the kids' safety, we throw away any green potatoes.
And that's such a shame, isn't it, when a good number of those do have to be thrown away, which is why that banking up really helps. Okay.
Great point.
Yeah.
Great point. So one of our soon-to-be favorite segments is called Kid Questions. And so we have a question from a child today.
Kids Questions time. Hello, my name is Briella. I love potatoes. My favorite are baked potatoes. My question is, what is the difference between baked potatoes and sweet potatoes?
Great question, Briella. I love it. And you can attest to this, is that I can absolutely guarantee that at least half of your class of students will just assume that a sweet potato and the Irish potato, this potato we're talking about, are exactly the same. And that is not the case at all. They are incredibly different. And our students who live in this part of the world, because sweet potatoes grow really readily here, and they really are part of the diet here, part of the culinary experience in their homes and celebrations. So Irish potatoes and sweet potatoes are incredibly different. In fact, they come from two different botanical families. The Irish potato comes from the Solanaceae family, which is actually the nightshade family. So they are botanically more akin to eggplants, tomatoes, peppers, and even nicotine. I know, more related to nicotine than they are to the sweet potato, which I find interesting. So the part of the plant that we eat is the tuber. The leaves and the fruit of the regular Irish potato are actually toxic, and the growth habit is very different from that of a sweet potato. Now, the sweet potato is part of the Convolvulaceae family.
Impressive.
Which is actually the morning glory family. So the sweet potato is so much more related to bindweed than it is to the Irish potato. Interesting. So, and actually the part of the plant that we eat is actually a root and not a tuber. The leaves of a sweet potato vine are edible, and they're utterly delicious. And they're wilted down like you would like a regular green and eaten. And here they are a sprawling carpet in the summer, aren't they? Again, a very different growing habit than our Irish potato. And I suppose the mistaken similarity comes along due to both of them grow like a root crop. So all the kids just assume anything that grows in the ground underneath is a root crop at the same time. And also, I suppose, culinary, they're used in really rather a similar kind of way. But I think the better explanation here, Anne, comes from our students who just says, well, this the same because they both look like a potato.
Marvelous.
Can't argue with that.
So this brings us to the end of our All About Potato podcast. We're so glad you joined us, and we can't wait to hear stories from you about your planting adventures in the garden.
Remember that we do have an email address. It's podcast@madegreen, green with an E on the end.com, and we'd love to hear from you. Send us some photographs of your potatoes, or just let us know, or let us know anything else that you'd like to hear from us about. It's been wonderful to have you along with us today, and we look forward to the next time.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe and share us with a friend. Special thanks to Ben Green for the music and to all our student contributors. As always, you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram @MadeGreen, or visit us at our website www.madegreen.com. Details of today's show and other resources are in our show notes. Any proceeds from any affiliate links shared help fund our school garden programs. We look forward to seeing you next time on the School Garden Podcast.